Dad, let's send these guys Track of the Moon Beast. It stars nobody and features nothing. I hope you gag on it.
This time we watch Season 10, Episode 7, Track of the Moon Beast.
The one where a band from New Mexico sings a song about a California lady.
Oh, gosh. But first, some follow-up.
Hey, we talked about something last time in the show 13, and I set it up because I knew we could get people to do the research that I only wanted to half-heartedly do.
I mean, I think you set up like 4 or 5 things, but one of which piqued more interest than the others.
It's true. We were talking about Doctor Who and the idea that the Doctor might save the Queen. And we wondered how many times it happened. And a few people, a few good Whovians, wrote in to tell us what they knew. But we got one letter that was more exhaustive than all the rest.
Ooh.
So this is from Perry. Thank you, Perry.
Thank you, Perry.
I'm going to read it to you real quick. I'm going to race through it.
Okay.
So at the end, I want you to tell me what detail Perry didn't include.
Okay.
Okay. Hey guys, assuming we're only talking about British royal queens, Elizabeth II also appeared in Silver Nemesis, 7th Doctor, 1988, played by Mary Reynolds, uncredited, taking her dogs for a walk. Queen Elizabeth II is also briefly in Voyage of the Damned, 10th Doctor, 2007, played by Jessica Martin, nearly killed by a flying Titanic ship. Queen Elizabeth I is also in The Shakespeare Code 2007, played by Angela Pleasance, as opposed to The Day of the Doctor, 11th Doctor 2013, where she's played by Joanna Page. Queen Victoria appears in Tooth and Claw, 10th Doctor 2006, played by Pauline Collins, in which she not only founds Torchwood, but also knights both the Doctor and his companion Rose. Queen Elizabeth X appears in The Beast Below, 11th Doctor 2010, played by Sophie Okonedo, in which she saves a gigantic space whale. There are other queens in Doctor Who, of course, including monsters such as Queen of the Skithra, 13th Doctor, 2020, but also Queen Nefertiti, Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, 11th Doctor, 2012. Love your show. Sincerely, Perry.
You're telling me that Perry left out information inside of that fantastic summary of queens?
I think he knew we didn't need him to tell us what was immediately obvious, which is that the Queen Elizabeth I from the Shakespeare Code, played by Angela Pleasance. Daughter of, guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
Stop!
Oh, yes, we've mentioned Angela's work before on this show.
Wow, that is a legacy that just keeps giving to It's Just a Show.
Just fantastic work. So thank you so much, Perry. Thank you all, Whovians. If Perry forgot something, you can still write in, but we probably won't read it because really, that's a different podcast. Go listen to Lazy Doctor Who.
Although I think the Venn diagram of our show and that show, lots of overlap. Lots of overlap. Also, I'm so pleased that there was a future Queen of England that was inside of the show. That's lovely. Not just past queens or present.
Yeah, no, that sounds really fun. Doctor Who, I don't really watch the show, but my understanding is it can be silly sometimes.
It's lots of fun when it is.
All right, well, speaking of silly, I guess we should move on to Track of the Moon Beast.
Does this movie qualify as silly, Chris?
Let's find out. This time we watched Season 10, Episode 7, Track of the Moon Beast. Johnny Longbow is a professor of anthropology in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's part of the Navajo Nation, and he makes a fine stew. One of his former students, Paul, is a white guy who switched over to mineralogy. Oh, and let's see, there's also a news photographer named Kathy. Johnny introduces Paul and Kathy, and they get hot and heavy with each other real quickly. So, this all seems nice. But nothing perfect lasts forever. Paul and Kathy get caught in a meteor shower, which isn't quite as romantic as getting caught in the rain, especially when a piece of meteorite gets lodged in your brain. Now that's what happens to Paul, and it causes him to change. Specifically, it causes him to transform into a lizard monster at night and go on killing sprees. Yikes. Of course, come the dawn, Paul can't remember killing anyone, but he still feels like crap. Meanwhile, the police are baffled by all these murders, and especially by the giant lizard prints they find at the scene of the crime. Naturally, they call in their local anthropologist. Johnny Longbow knows of a piece of Navajo history that has been passed down about a lizard monster who everyone was afraid of until it suddenly exploded. So maybe the killer is that lizard? Eventually, they realize that Paul has, in fact, been turning into that lizard, so close enough. Specialists are flown in from Washington, but there's really nothing that can be done. Paul is a killing machine who is going to explode someday. So Paul, after he finds out about this, goes up to his favorite spot, Sandia Crest, just outside of Albuquerque, to take care of the problem himself. But Paul's quest is beset by complications, and he ends up transforming into the monster. Luckily, Johnny Longbow is there with his longbow, and he fires an arrow with an arrowhead that was made out of a meteorite, and this causes Paul to explode. And Kathy doesn't even take a photo of her newsworthy boyfriend dying spectacularly. She could have won a Pulitzer for that. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, back in the 90s and famously forever in the Midwest, we deep-fried everything and sometimes turned it into something like the onion blossom, where you rip off pieces and dip them into sauces, and it was delicious. This episode finds the bots deep-frying, everything, including Tom's head, which makes a lovely in-theater snack. Pearl has exposed Bobo's brain and attached electrode-type things to it so she can use a remote to control Bobo's actions. Diabolical and brilliant evil science behavior. Not so brilliant or mad science-y is sharing this by giving Mike a remote too. I mean, he nearly makes Bobo free them from the experiment. Come on, Pearl. You're a better evil scientist than this, and you hate sharing. Remember when you were a kid in a car on a long drive with your siblings and you basically ignored them and it drove them crazy as they kept trying harder and harder to get your attention? Well, Mike is you, and the bots are your siblings in this sketch. Mike is just casually eating a bowl of green stuff, maybe pea pods, and the bots are trying to reenact the mask scene from the movie. But with no reaction from Mike, it basically breaks Crow. I mean, Crow is broken. Next up, Mike is recording deep voiceover to detail the rise and fall of the movie's rock band. You know the drill. Shy band playing gigs in their hometown, catapulted to fame, loving the attention and the ladies until they get caught up in the drugs and alcohol to cope with this fame monster. Then the inevitable crash, rehab, and near obscurity, followed by a reunion tour that reintroduces the music to a whole new generation. A chance for redemption, or maybe just another step in the rock cycle. Crow and Tom have taken peeping to a whole other level, as they have built a toy car with a camera attached to follow Mike into his bedroom. I feel like this segment is almost the opening to a Criminal Minds episode, if only the background music was, ominous, cueing the audience that this behavior is wrong and not funny. I mean, we learn Mike has stuffies and he plays with them. We thankfully do not see him take off his robe, because again, that would be wrong and not funny. In the final segment, Mike finds Tom crying on the SOL because he's played with his bow and arrow and shot down a little baby satellite. And Tom is all worried that the mama satellite will come and be all mad at him. And then the mama satellite does come by and take her baby satellite back. Down in the castle, Brain Guy is giving Bobo tips on keeping his brain healthy now that it's exposed. They seem to be becoming friends, so Pearl uses the Bobo remote to make him say mean things and instill animosity and break the friendship. Can't have these minions working together. They could take over the franchise. What do you think, sirs? Chris, what did you think of this episode and movie?
Well, okay. The movie's not very good. It's not the worst movie they've ever done, but it's not very good. I did appreciate that it was kind of surprisingly tightly structured. Like, they'd mention things in the movie, like the longbow, and then those would pay off eventually. I didn't expect the longbow to pay off. That's plot 101 in movie making, but like, they still did it, which a lot of other films can't do. So that's nice.
Sure, I guess. I guess the payoff of the longbow is worth the wretched movie we have to watch.
Well, no, but I mean, it's an incompetent movie in some ways, and it's a little bit competent in other ways, right? Like, The Million Eyes of Sumeru could never remember that they had mentioned a longbow in the first act. But, you know, it's a somewhat tedious movie. It's a kind of movie that I don't really want to watch, and that MST3K is going to be the way that I see this kind of movie and think, well, okay, that's a thing that happened, I guess.
Do you feel like the riffing that they did helped to redeem the watching of the movie?
I mean, it varied from, being, pretty funny. There were definitely some things that I laughed at, and being pretty tedious. I know that Kevin Murphy talked about how Johnny Longbow, and in particular his speech about his stew and its ingredients, and the way he ends it with onions, was the funniest thing that they'd ever seen, and made it one of the best characters to ever appear in a movie that MST3K did.
Wow.
Apparently, Kevin said this. I disagree.
Yeah, I have to say, like, they've seen way funnier characters, and they really did play that bit to death.
They sure did. It's a sci-fi era MST3K episode, and they're going to find a bit to play to death. Oh, well.
I mean, it was a good bit at first.
Yeah. The first time it was very good. And then the 10th time, I also didn't especially enjoy all the jokes that they made at the expense of the photographer woman.
Yes. Yeah.
Which,
To be fair, she's a terrible character. They give her nothing to work with. Also, she's a bad actress. Ooh.
Well, one person who didn't hate those jokes was the actor who played that photographer woman.
No way, really?
On the Shout Factory DVD release of the episode, there is a little interview featurette with her, and she goes into some details. She's from Minneapolis originally, so that's always nice. Her name's Lee Drake, at least it was. That's how she's credited in the movie. Mm-hmm. And she was in a few other movies eventually. She was in Return of the Living Dead and a few other things, in small roles, I imagine.
Gosh, I've seen Return of the Living Dead, although I saw it as like a middle schooler and I have nightmares about it, so I'm never going to go back. Like, I'm never going to return to Return of the Living Dead. But wow, she's in it. That almost makes me want to try. But she's so deadpan inside of this movie. Like, all of her reactions to things are like, oh boy, neat.
Well, this was her first movie, and also the director refused to do a second take. Her name's Lee Drake. They called her One Take Drake. And she was like, I kind of think we should maybe be doing more takes. But if you say so.
I'd kind of like to be more than one take Drake. Could that be possible?
Exactly. So like the movie wraps up and the director says, oh, actually, we've watched the dailies now and it's not really good enough and we're not going to release it. So she thought, oh, that's unfortunate. But, she went on with her life. And then years later, she gets a call from her stepmother who was like, oh, I bought your movie at the 7-Eleven. She never knew it was released. This was like 10 years later. And she finally gets a chance to see it. And she starts crying because it's so bad.
Oh, now I feel really bad for her.
And then her husband comes home and is like, well, let me see it. And so she reluctantly lets him watch it. And he's like, this is really bad in a funny way. Here, let me show you how it's funny. And she was like, actually, it is kind of funny. And so she was able to start laughing at it.
So basically her husband MST3K'd it for her so that she could enjoy the watching of it?
That's what it sounds like. And then years later, it was picked up by MST3K. And she was super excited and honored. And she loved the riff. And she was only sad that her husband, who was a big fan of MST3K, had passed away shortly before the episode came out.
You know what, Chris? That is the sweetest story. I think I might change my mind about how I feel about this episode based on that. Because I came into this discussion thinking, black, this is black. And then like, you know what? That's actually super sweet. I think I like this woman. I've changed my mind. She's great.
I mean, she says everybody on the set was really nice to work with, basically, just they didn't know what they were doing, and many of them were not good actors.
Yeah. They have explosions of acting at times, and it's like, if we just could have, like evened that out, like averaged that out through the whole movie instead of have explosions of acting at some moments and dreadful underacting at other places, it might have made for like a more interesting movie. Because as you say, the story isn't irredeemable, right? Like as a movie story. It's interesting, right? Like man gets turned into a monster, doesn't know what he's doing at night as he murders citizens, and eventually has to come to some sort of understanding about who he's becoming and how he wants to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that plot, that basic plot carried out better elsewhere. But yeah, it's not completely irredeemable. I mean, unfortunately, quite a lot of the film is packed up in exploitation of Native American people.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah. When you were talking about Johnny Longbow and the longbow thing paying off, all I could think about was the archery scene where even our riffers point out the super amazing music that they're using inside of the background to let you know that, oh, hey, everybody, a Native American's gonna shoot an arrow, a bow and arrow now. So
we've talked about this in previous episodes, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but if you go back to our episode long ago, these are both long ago episodes, actually, but our episode on Werewolf, which is set in Arizona and exploits Navajo skinwalker stories, we talk a bit about it then, and we also talk about it in our episode on Cry Wilderness. Here in Track of the Moon Beast, we are told that this lizard that we encounter and the story of Lizard and Coyote, which Johnny Longbow tells us about, is supposed to be local to this area, to Albuquerque.
mm-hmm.
To be a Navajo story, I suppose. And now I'm no expert on this, and I don't entirely trust going to, the internet, where most of the sites you'll find are very much not put up by Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
But, from what I can tell, this story that they're relaying is a traditional story of a Native American tribe, but not Navajo. It's, I believe, mostly centered around some peoples in Central California, including the Pomo people and a few related tribes. And even the name that Paul gives to his lizard, Atenu, is based on that tribe's language's name for the lizard.
Yeah, turns out not all Native American cultures are a monolith. There's lots of different tribes with different traditions. Oh my goodness. But let's, make movies about them anyway.
Yeah, so it's part of a whole long history of exploiting this, half understood and misrepresented and inappropriately represented material for, profit, I guess, by other peoples. It's very depressing.
I guess. Is it a way to make your monster movie more grounded in some sort of way? Like, I don't know, why use someone else's culture in this way for your monster movie? What does it add to your story?
Because in sort of, mainstream white imagination, Native American stories are old and forgotten. And you've unearthed an old and forgotten tale of an old and forgotten monster who nevertheless has some profound connection to the location. That's the resonances that you get to exploit if you go down this path.
Jeez, joke's on them. He's an anthropologist, not an archaeologist. Doesn't that mean he studies living cultures? Come on.
I actually think there might be anthropologists who study no longer extant cultures, but either way, doesn't matter because these cultures still exist. Very much
yes,
so.
It's true. Even if this story is one from a time that is supposed to be many, many years ago, maybe even many generations ago.
Yeah, it's very bad. It's very bad. So there aren't a lot of familiar faces in this episode. The monster is played by Joe Blasco, who designed the costume and is in the costume, and he was also in parts of the Clonus Horror and The Touch of Satan, and he's done a lot of other work, and people really like him for his costumery. He is a classic, I am led to believe. But significantly more familiar, I suppose, are the writers of the film, Bill Finger and Charles Sinclair, who you might remember were the writers of The Green Slime.
With the best rockin' theme song ever.
They didn't write the music. They wrote the script. Wow. They also didn't write California Lady. That was a guy named Frank Larrabee. And if you want to hear the single version, we'll have a link in the show notes.
Oh my gosh. But the best writing of the green slime was the writing of that song. I mean, plotline was a little convoluted and had a really ridiculous love triangle thrown inside of there. I presume that these writers don't put that in all of their movies because I didn't really see a love triangle inside of the Track of the Moon Beast. It was pretty much just pairing up and leaving Johnny Longbow on the outside of all the pairs.
Well, there might be some love of a bit of a convoluted plot because Bill Finger, as we failed to point out when we talked about the green slime, but we got letters, was one of the guys who created the Batman.
Oh my gosh, I love the Batman! How could you not have pointed this out, Chris? You know how I love Adam West and his connection with my alma mater, and I watched Batman, the show from the 60s all the time. Like, how did this slip our... Well, we were road tripping. That's why it slipped our minds.
We were road tripping, so I didn't have as much time to go into depth as I wanted to. But also, I've never been a big superhero comics reader, so I don't recognize the name of the creator of Batman, but also because it's more convoluted than that, even because the Batman, for many, many years, wasn't credited to Bill Finger at all.
Oh.
It was credited to a guy named Bob Kane. Shall I tell you the story of Bill Finger and Bob Kane and the Batman?
Yes, although I do have to say, and this is for our listeners and for you, every time you say Bill Finger, all I can think of is the theme music to the James Bond movie, so I want to be like, Bill Finger! Sorry, you can go on now.
Now, will I go into it and make you hit the right notes?
Never. Come on, that should
I've
never
done it
have
before.
the right note. Yes, you have. Our listeners have no idea how bad a singer I am.
No, you're a perfectly fine singer. You just haven't prepped and you haven't thought about that melody specifically.
No, it's true. It's true.
So, picture it. New York, the late 30s. Bob Kane is working as a comics artist, and he is looking to add people to his shop. That's sort of what you call a studio in the comics biz, I guess. And he invited this guy named Bill Finger, who had gone to his high school, I think, but they weren't friends or anything. Okay. But he invited him to work because he was looking for work as a writer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Cool. Now, around this time, Bob saw how popular this new character, Superman, was becoming, and he wanted a piece of that pie.
Who wouldn't?
Exactly. So he came up with a bat-themed superhero, and he showed it to his new writer, Bill.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Bill looked it over and said, that's a good idea, but here's a few refinements that you might want to make to have it make a little more sense and maybe give it a bit more personality.
Oh my gosh, did he put all the interesting things about Batman into the Batman?
Well, let's see. First off, he said, instead of one of those little domino masks, the kind that Robin wears, maybe he should have like a cowl with pointy bat ears.
So he actually looks like a bat as the Batman?
So he looks more like a bat.
Okay.
Yeah, and it'll make a good shape. And also, maybe instead of having like stiff bat wings strapped to his back, that would make it hard for him to get around the city.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe he should just have a cape with like scalloped edges so it looks like bat wings when it's spread out.
But what of a hysterical vision to think of him walking through the streets of New York just being like, thump, 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 thump to everybody as they walk by.
Also, maybe instead of a bright red outfit, maybe he should wear like subdued blacks and grays so he could be, something of a Dark Knight.
Stop it. He's the one who gave the Dark Knight?
Well, I actually don't think he was. But he was the one who dressed him in dark colors so that he could prowl about at night effectively instead of wearing bright red.
No, it's true. Bats are not known for standing out against the background, right? They're supposed to be a little, camouflage.
Exactly. So Bob thinks these are all great ideas. He took them, he incorporated them into the work, and he went off to Detective Comics and he sold them this idea for the Batman.
Nice.
And, they gave him a contract for it. But in that contract, it was stipulated that now and forever, Bob Kane would be given the credit for creating Batman.
What was there a particular reason why DC only wanted one creator?
Oh, we don't know. I mean, we have no idea.
Or whether Bob Kane was the guy who was just like, and it's all my idea. Make sure my name's on there.
That seems more likely, but we don't know.
Okay, fair. I wasn't in the meeting at the negotiation, so.
Exactly. And we've never seen the contract.
And I don't know Bob Kane, so I can't say whether he's more likely to go one way or the other.
Well, he's more likely to go one way than the other, yeah. So Bill Finger and a few other writers are still working in Bob Kane's shop, but when the stories start appearing in Detective Comics, only Bob's name appears on the masthead.
It's not even like the Bob Kane shop or something.
No, it's just his name with a big O in the middle of Bob. That's very stylish. And, you know, over the years, Bill Finger continues writing Batman, and he comes up with lots of ideas for the world, such as fleshing out who Bruce Wayne is exactly, and making sure Batman was a detective and a scientist more than a, Superman-style superhero.
Oh my gosh, that's so good, because I gotta tell you, I watched some of the Batman shows from like the early 40s, and they were not very interesting. Like having him, like, because, I mean, basically he was just being like a Nazi fighter and also fighting like the Japanese menace on American soil because, we're so afraid of those people. It's just like, oh my God, this is just a Superman storyline with a really boring alter ego. Like Bruce Wayne was not the millionaire playboy trying to create a foil. It was just like, some lazy dude who had a girlfriend who I have no idea why she was still with him, but it was like Lois Lane, basically a really like involved woman trying to get to the bottom of things with really excellent skills, but she still likes this guy who's just like a boring, lazy dude. It's like, oh my God, at least make him a rich playboy. It's more interesting. It has more going for it.
He's a rich playboy in the very first Batman story, which Bill Finger wrote. So like that's the serials taking that out.
Ha! Fine. Whatever.
So let's see, what else did he do in some of those early stories? He invented or developed some of the villains, like the Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, Catwoman, and more.
I mean, the whole point of Lego Batman is that the Joker is upset that Batman won't acknowledge that the Batman needs the Joker. Like you need an arch nemesis in order to have meaning inside of your life. Like the whole movie is leading towards the moment where Batman can tell the Joker, I hate you. Aw, Batman, I hate you too.
Bill Finger also helped create Robin and wrote the story of the first Robin comic.
All right, well, Robin's okay, but he's not needed. Oh, I'm sorry, I have an opinion. I don't like Robin. I mean, I like Robin inside of the 60s one because he's campy and fun, and he says, like, holy hijinks, Batman. I love that.
Yeah, he doesn't say that in the first time he appears. Because I did go and read some of the first year of Batman comics, and it takes him a while even before he starts, like, quipping while he's beating up people.
Oh, man.
So he gets there, and it's in one of the Bill Finger strips that I first noticed him actually making those kinds of jokes. The first strips are not really like the Batman that we know from the Adam West TV show or the later movies. It's this sort of proto thing. It's still figuring out how it's not Superman, and it's still setting together its world building. And Bill Finger had a tremendous finger in that.
Look at you go. I saw what you did there.
Exactly. Now, keep in mind, this is a collaborative environment. You've got a lot of people in a room together making this thing, bouncing ideas off each other. Attribution can get a little bit fuzzy. Sometimes creativity is more than the sum of its parts. But, our legal and financial systems for rewarding creativity can't really handle the messy way things tend to get made. But Bob Kane took all the credit, and that doesn't seem very good. And also, once the TV show started in the 60s, Batman got really lucrative, and Bob got all the money, more or less. Certainly Bill Finger didn't get any. And then once the 1989 Batman movie came out, Bob saw even more money.
Yes.
And Bob Kane liked money, and he liked celebrity, and he wanted to be a big, deal and be on TV and yada, yada, yada. And meanwhile, Bill Finger had died in poverty in 1974.
I don't like that.
No, a lot of people don't. So there's a documentary that came out in 2017 called Batman and Bill. which traces the efforts that were made over the years to get Bill's contributions properly credited.
Were there other people in the studio that people have been championing to be a part of the Batman story as well?
Not really. I mean, there have been other people whose names were suppressed who would have liked to have gotten, this is the person who wrote this story and whatnot. But everybody who worked with Bob Kane in the early days basically agrees that Bill did most of the work in making Batman, especially Batman as we know him and love him today.
Mm-hmm.
And even later in life, especially after Bill died, Bob admitted as much as well. And he seemed to feel a bit bad about how he had screwed Bill over, but not bad enough to actually do anything about it.
Well, what could he do? He'd already died.
Well, yeah, but he still could have tried to set something in motion so that Bill's name came up in the movies whenever it said, Batman characters created by Bob Kane.
You're right. You're right.
And so now, after the efforts of many people, which you can find out about if you want to watch the documentary, which is, fine. But if you want to find out more about it, then you can find out that starting with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, the credit comes up, created by Bob Kane with Bill Finger.
Nice. But Bill Finger, even though his name was getting left off of the created by credit, he still interacted with and supported the development of Batman over the years, right? Like, it's not like the Bob Kane studio shut down and everybody lost their jobs and Bob just went ahead by himself, right?
Right. Eventually, Bill Finger got hired by DC directly, and he started working on a bunch of other stuff. But eventually, he and his later writing partner, Charles Sinclair, would do other things together. They would write some movies. They wrote The Green Slime. They wrote Track of the Moon Beast. And they did, in fact, write 2 episodes of the 1960s Batman TV show, which was the only time during Bill Finger's life that he got to see his name credited as a writer of a Batman story.
You sent those to me, and I watched them. Did you watch them too?
No, I didn't. I wanted to let you watch them and be special. I don't know if I've seen them before, but...
You probably have. They're not my favorite. They're not my favorite of the 60s episode. I don't think the Clock King is as interesting a nemesis as, like, Egghead or Poison Ivy or Catwoman or, Cesar Romero as the Joker. Could there be any? Or Burgess Meredith as the Penguin? We said we'd never get to say his name again, but Burgess Meredith. But the Clock King, the Clock King, the hook in between the 2 episodes, the Clock King traps Batman and Robin inside of an hourglass, and the sands are falling on them as time runs out. It's great.
My understanding is that Bill Finger had a real fondness for oversized things.
Oh.
So like the oversized penny, I believe that's in the Batcave, is his idea.
Oh, that is fun.
Yeah. So Track of the Moon Beast was filmed in 1972, but it didn't come out until 1976 because it was bad. And Bill Finger died in 1974.
Ooh, so he never saw how his script was actualized.
He never saw the finished project. Apparently, Bill and Charles wrote the script in a weekend. I don't know if you could tell.
I mean, it seems very well thought out. I mean, that longbow thing was a real clincher for me.
So, for the most part, Batman and Bill as a documentary is fine. But one of the things I did like about it was how it ends, where it talks about what happened to Bill Finger's body after he died, because he was very poor and it was long thought that his body was buried in a potter's field, in like a pauper's grave.
Oh.
And an unmarked headstone and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it turns out that isn't what happened. Bill Finger had a son who collected his father's body shortly after he died, and had him cremated.
Uh-huh.
And took the ashes back to where he was living at the time, which was Oregon.
Really?
Yeah, apparently. And he went out to the coast and he spread the ashes out on the beach into the shape of a bat.
Oh.
And he let the Pacific Ocean take his father away.
Oh my gosh, Chris. Once again, I came into this discussion thinking bad things, and this is another story that's making me think, no, I've changed my mind. That is really sweet. Like, what a wonderful way for a son to honor his dad.
So, Charlotte.
Yes. Yes, Chris?
Get ready, because I, as I mentioned, read the stories from the first year of Batman comics in Detective Comics and when Batman started getting his own comic book. So I thought it would be a little fun to do a segment that we could call Comic Book Issues with AI, Batman or Not. I suppose I could have just had 7 different theme songs playing at the same time. Hopefully I didn't do that.
I really hope you did. I hope you have Crypt Keeper or Not followed by Issues with I, followed by all the good things.
All right. I'm going to give you 3 plot lines from early Batman comics, one of which was created by ChatGPT.
Okay.
The other 2 are real.
Okay.
And you've got to tell me which one is the fake.
And to be fair, like, these are early Batman comics before he became like the quippy, silly crime fighter that we know from the 60s.
Yes.
Okay. So the Batman I'm not familiar with. This is going to be awesome.
Here we go. The Case of the Ruby Idol. A small ruby idol of the Hindu god Kila is found by an explorer and sold to a rich collector. A group of Hindu religious fanatics threaten to kill the collector if the collector doesn't return it. Thieves steal the idol and sell it to a pawnbroker in Chinatown named Sin Fang.
Oh boy.
Batman follows the idol's trail, narrowly escapes many deadly traps, and discovers that Sin Fang is actually the original explorer in disguise.
All right. Ruby Idol, selling and reselling. All right. So that's the first storyline.
Second storyline, Batman versus the Vampire. Bruce Wayne's fiancée, Julie Madison, goes on a trip to Europe, and Batman follows along to make sure she stays safe. But Julie is hypnotized by a vampire named the Monk, who wants to feed her to his wolves. Batman tracks the monk to his castle in the Carlathen Mountains of Hungary. He melts down a silver statue belonging to the monk into bullets and uses them to shoot and kill the monk and his vampiric assistant, Dala.
That doesn't sound very Batman-y.
Why is that?
Well, because Batman doesn't use guns. That sounds a little sus, but I'm willing to hear the third story.
Okay, third story. Professor Hugo's Future Crimes.
Ooh.
A brilliant but insane scientist, Professor Hugo, who claims to be a former protege of the great inventor Nicodemus Teslov, builds a machine that supposedly predicts future crimes before they happen. Skeptical, Batman investigates and finds that Hugo is using his machine to direct criminals to commit the very acts he claims to foresee. After a series of elaborate traps, Batman turns the tables and tricks Hugo into one of his own predicted, in air quotes, disasters, a burning warehouse where he seemingly perishes in the flames.
I want to read that one if it's not real. Like, who hasn't written that one because they need to write it? Like, right now, that seems amazing. I totally want that one to be real. It sounds so good. And you got the funny names, like the ridiculous names. That's so important. And like, oh my goodness, I feel like Ed Wood might have made that. Doesn't he have a friend who predicts the future?
Criswell, yes. Criswell predicts the future.
Oh my gosh, it's like a Criswell episode of Batman. Okay, I want the third one to be true, so I'm not going to vote for that one. The first one has all of the casual racism that I associate with early Batman, so I'm going to go with the middle one as being the fake one.
All right, so you're going with the vampire story.
Yes, I'm going with the vampire story. I mean, I like the use of the bat vampire thing going on, but I just don't see Bruce Wayne / Batman following his girlfriend to Europe.
That is a real one.
No way!
That is absolutely real. And it's even wilder than that in many ways. That's actually a two-parter that has been brought down into one summary. But yeah, because at some point early on when they're in Paris, Bruce Wayne is attacked by a giant ape out of nowhere. Has nothing to do with anything. Who knows?
Magilla Gorilla, what are you doing? Leave the Batman alone.
This was mostly written by somebody else. I think Bill Finger helped with the beginning of the story, but either way. Also, at some point, while Batman is talking to the monk inside his castle, the monk transforms, as all vampires do, into a
giant rat.
Wolf. He's a werewolf.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the Bram Stoker's Dracula that Francis Ford Coppola did, he really did have like communication with the wolves of the area. So
there you go. You know, I read Dracula not too long ago, a few years ago now, I guess, but I don't remember the wolf part, but that totally could be in it. It makes sense. And that would be where he got it from. It was just very surprising to hear this insistence that vampires and werewolves are the same. I will say, like, the other thing that I found about this first year of Batman stories is that they are very violent. Like, the very first story involves a guy who's, for reasons, trying to kill 3 other people. Mm-hmm. And the first person dies, and that's how Batman and Bruce Wayne and Commissioner Gordon find out about it. The second guy, Batman doesn't arrive in time to save from being killed, but he does get a lead. And so he's able to go to save the third guy. And the third guy is being killed by the murderer. Now, the murderer is like in charge of a chemical plant. And so he's going to kill the third guy through a device that he has used in the past to euthanize guinea pigs.
I'm sorry, what?
Yes. But it's a giant like cloche that drops down from the ceiling. And the cloche into which like the gas is supposed to go that will euthanize guinea pigs is large enough for 2 adult men to stand in comfortably.
Oh my gosh. How many guinea pigs is he killing at once?
Exactly. The scale is ridiculous.
I mean,
don't worry. Batman saves him. He breaks the glass cloche and then he throws the bad guy into the giant 10-foot by 10-foot by 10-foot pit of acid that he's got open in his laboratory.
Which then turns him into the Joker. That's exactly how Jack Nicholson becomes the Joker in the 1989 Batman. He falls into a vat of acid.
Exactly. That's a reference to the very first Batman story. That's not how the continuity played out over the comic strips, I believe, but that was a nod to that in the 1989 Batman.
Good job, 1989 Batman. And for the record, Michael Keaton is the one like Dark Knight who could also be quippy and fun. I'm all in for Michael Keaton as the Batman.
So I read a bunch of Batman stuff. What did you get to read?
You know, this is quickly becoming a book podcast, Chris. Who knew? I read 2 books, one of which is directly mentioned inside of this episode, and the other one was just like a fun side hustle for me. I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Right, because there's a scene where Paul is messing with his bike, and Crow makes a reference to Zen and the Art of Watching Motorcycle Maintenance.
We're going to have to practice some Zen and the Art of Watching Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah, and it's really early in the episode after we've watched Paul, like, ride on his motorcycle on a road for entirely too long. It's not a very exciting part of the episode.
So did the book reflect people riding motorcycles for far too long and not too exciting ways?
Yeah. I mean, wow.
Because that's what I remember about it when I tried to read it as a kid.
I have a really hard time imagining you reading this, Chris. What made you want to read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
I think someone gave it to me, like an adult. I think an adult gave it to teenaged me, and it was like a very popular. I think it's supposed to be like the world's best-selling book of philosophy. Putting that in quotes, I'm afraid.
Certainly of like pop philosophy, perhaps. I don't know. Like, it is a road trip novel.
I like road trips.
Yes. And this is why I was interested in reading it, because I'd never read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, but I understood it was like a road trip book. And it is. It's this gentleman and his son son, and they are on a motorcycle, and they are driving from Minnesota to San Francisco. And the kid is like in his early teens. And then they're traveling for part of that with a couple friend of theirs who are on a second motorcycle. And basically, the book is the main character, who is probably just the author, Robert Pirsig. He's a person who has struggled with his mental health, which of course in the 60s meant he was sent to an institution and had electroshock therapy in order to combat his multiple personalities. And so in this book, he has already gone through all of that, and he is a father that this kid doesn't recognize because he is a different personality than he used to be. And so part of this is also him on his journey thinking about his previous self, which he's struggling with, but then also trying to relate to his kid as a father, but also relate to himself and his past self. But a lot of it is also him as a man riding a motorcycle that is old and that he knows how to fix and that he has done a lot of work on and learned how to work on, feeling vastly superior to his friend who bought a BMW brand new motorcycle and doesn't want to know shit about how to fix. He just wants to be able to drop it off with a mechanic and not have to learn how to fix his own motorcycle. But Pirsig is like, no, I can fix my own motorcycle and I can pay attention to what the pistons are like, and I oil it all the time, and I put things together, and I know how to change a wheel, and I'm really amazing at my motorcycle, and let me talk about how great I am with my motorcycle. And for this reason, I can't even imagine you picking this book up.
Yeah, sure. That description makes me think again about Sherlock Holmes.
Does it? How funny.
Well, I talked about this on the Spouter Inn, my other podcast, but in Study in Scarlet, it turns out that there are vast amounts of things that Sherlock Holmes doesn't know about and doesn't want to know about, such as the fact that the Earth rotates around the sun and not the other way around. He doesn't need to know this. He's like, this will never be useful for me in a case, so I'm going to attempt to forget it as soon as possible so that I can use my brain to remember other things that are more important.
Sure.
And so, like, I get the idea of wanting to know how your motorcycle works and taking, appreciating the quality of knowing it intimately and being able to make all sorts of things about it. And I also understand that sometimes you just want to buy a thing that'll get you from point A to point B because you have other things you want to think about. I trust that his friend also thinks about stuff deeply. It just might not be motorcycles.
I mean, but the thing is, according to his characterization of his friend inside of the book, his friend does not think deeply about other things, right? This is emblematic of the way he treats all things in his life, right? It's not, I'm saving my brain power for something else. It's, I don't care to look under the hood of anything. I just want to drink beer and hang out with my wife. Whereas Pirsig is like, I want to understand how everything works. It's important to have this connection with mechanical things. Like, it is wrong for technology to be a thing that you take for granted. You need to know the inner workings of it. You need to be able to fix it yourself. You need to know how it is working so that when things go wrong, you can, get to the bottom of that problem and not just take for granted that, throw your hands up in the air, there's nothing you can do, right? Like, his philosophy about technology is that technology is not something that is, a nebulous gray area that you just take the output from without understanding how it gets there. You need to be intimately familiar with all parts of it so that you can take it apart, look at all of the pieces, clean the pieces, refresh the pieces, and put it back together so that everything continues to run smoothly and nothing jams up the work along the way. And that's fine if that's the way that you want to do it.
But also, technology is vast. And I mean, I'm not talking about like iPhones or whatever. I'm talking about even in 1970s when this book was written, there was so much that could qualify as technology. There were so many things that could fall under that.
Mm-hmm.
And you simply can't know the ins and outs of every last thing that you encounter. So you're always picking and choosing, and it doesn't sound like he's acknowledging that.
I don't think that it fits into the philosophy of how he is understanding the way he thinks people should interact with the world.
I feel a very cranky old man about this cranky old man book. You know what I'm saying?
It's interesting to me that people want to emulate this journey and to go on the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance road trip now, right? Like then and now. People picked up this book. They were moved by his philosophy. They were moved by the personal narrative that he was sharing, but they were also moved by his descriptions of where he was going and these small towns and interacting with people who you might not have interacted with, because it's really easy for people, apparently, according to the story, to strike up a conversation with people who are riding bikes.
That feels like things I've seen in other biker movies from the time. So
possibly the case. Yeah. But it was echoed as well in the second book that I read. At first, I couldn't get Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance from my library, but I could get a book called Zen and Now.
Ah, I see what they did there.
Right? And it was written in the 2000s, like 2008, right? But it was the journey that this guy made. He tried to emulate the journey of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And he also found, as he went into these small towns, people would just talk to him, right? He'd park his bike and start walking around, and people were like, "Oh, where are you traveling from? Where are you going? Boy, you've been on the road a long time," right? And they'd recommend hotels and restaurants and stuff to him. He'd get in conversations with people at restaurants and bars. And, he was using Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance to be able to track the same journey and go on the same roads. And there's a piece in Zen and Now where he is talking about how awful it is to make road trips in cars and how it's basically just like you're watching TV and you're not really interacting with the journey that you're making, right? You don't have a feel for what the air feels like. You don't know what things smell like because you're inside of a box and you're looking at everything through the window. And all I could think about when I was reading that was the road trip that you and I took.
It was pretty nice.
It's number one, it was really nice to be inside of a car and to have air conditioning inside of those really hot things. No question. But also, I didn't feel like I was watching TV.
No, you were driving.
There's also that. But I also didn't feel like I was missing out on what things felt like. But I did get to curate what I got to interact with. I didn't have to feel the diesel fumes from all of the trucks that are on the same road as I am, right?
When we drove through those parts of the Midwest that in the summer were absolutely drenched in biting insects. Aren't you sad that they weren't biting you the whole time and getting inside your teeth?
Totally and completely sad. Yeah. There's even a part in the book where they're talking about talking to some guy with, they were camping somewhere. This is in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And they put their tents inside of a bit of trees to get protection from the wind. But of course, that's where all the insects are too. And they're just like, oh, so now I'm getting eaten alive in my sleeping bag, through the sleeping bag, because I'm trying to get away from the wind. And I'm like, oh, suckers. You could have been in a car in a hotel. Well, Chris, we have talked about this amazing, moon beast. Maybe you have a final factoid for us to wrap up the show.
Oh, I do, because they turned Tom's head into a bloomin' onion.
Yes. Deep fried deliciousness. Saucy.
I haven't had a bloomin' onion or an onion blossom in ages, and now I want one again.
When they were talking about the blooming onion and all that, all I could think was just like, is this even a thing that Chris can eat? Because often when they're deep frying those things, it's, in the same place where they deep fry all of the meats.
Well, okay, there is that. We don't think about that sometimes.
Yes. That makes life a little easier.
Yeah. I haven't had a Bloomin' Onion since the 90s, I don't think, when they were in their heyday.
Peak deep fried onion.
What do you know about the origin of the Bloomin' Onion or the onion blossom?
Not much, although it's like an appetizer at a steak place or something, right? Like one of the chain restaurant places?
Exactly. So it was probably invented in 1985, but it became big when it was part of the menu at the Outback Steakhouse when it opened in 1988. The Outback Steakhouse. I didn't go there very often because steakhouse, and I was already a vegetarian at that point.
Yeah.
But Australian-themed restaurant serving American food based in Tampa. Yes.
That is fun. What a fun mixture that is.
So it's not a Midwestern thing, even though it is fried, like you said it was.
No, being deep fried is a Midwestern thing.
Yes, but the Bloomin' Onion itself is not. Although the Bloomin' Onion is a trademark of Outback Steakhouse, which I think is why they call it an onion blossom here. Either way, same thing, and it's incredibly bad for you.
As most deep fried things are. So it's going to be really weird for me to say this, Chris, but I've never had a blooming onion. I've had deep fried onions.
Yeah, of course. I was once, when I was a teenager, taken by my parents to a biker bar, and I had nothing to do, and I was too young to drink, but I did order a Bloomin' Onion, and I ate the whole thing. My question for you, Charlotte, how many calories is in a single onion with the ranch-style dipping sauce of a Bloomin' Onion?
Oh my goodness gracious. Probably like half a day's worth? So like 1,000 to 1,500 calories?
1,660.
Dang!
That's how many calories I enjoyed that evening. About 44 grams of saturated and trans fats.
Wow!
Just a terrible idea, and I want one so bad right now.
So it's worth it, is what you're saying. 100% worth it?
I think I'm allowed to have one every 30 years or so, don't you?
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you helped create a superhero, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our email is info@itsjustashow.com. We're on Blue Sky, and we would love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our randomly selected supporter, Chris. Thank you, Chris. For about $1 an episode, you too can be like Chris and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Discord, and you can listen to all our super fan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/171. I don't want to have another Moon Beast episode. Tell me this isn't like the Colossus where there's like 3 of them or something and we have to revisit the Colossus. Is there more Moon Beast in our future?
Nope. But you're not going to like this. We're going to be doing next Season 1, Episode 10, Robot Holocaust, with a little short called Radar Men from the Moon.
Oh, Chris.
It's the last one. It's the last one. Don't worry. This is going to be the end of the Radar Men from the Moon.
Okay. Because I don't know if I can handle much more Commando Cody.
Well, we'll see just how much you can take next episode. But until then...
T-Rex has a classic pear shape.
Your own personal moon rock. Take it away, Theme Squad.